Do you believe in no sex before marriage as a concept?
As an ideal, yeah, that's right.
And why would that result in better relationships and a better society more broadly?
Well, here's one way of looking at it. So let's say you take the alternative approach, okay? You're going to try your partner on for size, so you live together. Well, first of all, we know that couples who live together are more likely to get divorced rather than less. Let's pull back a little bit. What have you done right?
I have focused on myself for a long time.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means I fortified myself financially.
Okay.
So that I can support others. I can support family.
So that's not exactly focusing on yourself, right?
Okay.
That's focusing on getting your act together.
Okay.
Like, and I'm being very picky about the words because focus on yourself, that has a narcissistic connotation. But that isn't what you're talking about. You said you fortified yourself financially. Okay, so now you have foundation under your feet financially.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What else?
I go to the gym, so I'm strong, physically strong.
Okay.
Which is useful. I've learned a lot.
Okay.
I've done a lot of learning about myself, about how I show up in the world.
Right. So you're trying to learn.
Yes, I've learned some skills.
So there's three things that are pretty good.
Yeah.
You've got a firm financial foundation. You're maintaining yourself physically or even improving yourself, and you're doing the same thing, say spiritually and intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that'll attract a fair number of people, just those three, right? And maybe you're increasing the probability that it will attract the sort of person that you would like to attract.
That is very much the story of my life. Like, don't think people realize this, but I've actually been on, 4 dates in my entire life. I'm 32. And I took this really seems counterintuitive approach to myself, which was, as an 18-year-old, I basically couldn't attract anybody.
Yeah.
I was also not on dating apps. I wasn't doing so for 10 years, I basically focused on myself. And at 27 years old, someone messaged me and I went on it. And this is how I am. Like, if I'm going to go on a date, I'm going to go all in. It was a 3-day date that I planned in an Excel document. I've been with that person for 6 years. So I feel like I didn't date. Good. I didn't go to bars and
That's worth taking apart. I like to do arithmetic with my clients. Like, people hate arithmetic, and it's no wonder because it's so savage. So I'll give you an example. So 15 years ago, I counted the number of times I would see my parents. It was like 20 times. So then I knew that. Right, 20 isn't very many. Right. How many people do you get to try on in your life? 5. If you're lucky. If you're attractive and fortunate, you get 5 cracks at the piñata. 5 isn't very many. And people think, well, there's plenty of fish in the sea. It's like, that doesn't mean they're going to swarm around you, buddy. Right? And maybe it's even worse for women because their time frame is very short. Like, if a woman isn't in a relationship, family relationship, by 30, then it's starting to get pretty damn rough. And that's almost independent of how attractive she is. It's like, you don't have much time. Better get yourself prepared.
When you say pretty damn rough, what do you mean?
Well,
to find a mate or to have a child? Or
both. Well, we know now that at the present time in the West, half of women 30 and younger don't have a child. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, we also know that couples 30, 1 in 3 couples at 30 already have trouble conceiving. And that definition of trouble is 1 year of attempt with no success. Okay. So fertility goes off a cliff at 35. So 30, you're pushing your luck at 30. At 35, you are seriously pushing your luck. I worked for 10 years with a strata of the highest achieving women likely in Canada. I had, as part of my clinical practice, a offering that we made to consulting firms and law firms. And the offer was, send us your best people and we'll work for them. But the consequence of that is that they'll be even more productive. So in the typical law firm, for example, there's people who don't do well. Then there's people who are good lawyers. Then there are people who are good lawyers that bring in business. There's like none of them. They're super valuable. And if a law firm has someone like that, they want to keep them. And they're often women, half the time, let's say. And those were the women. I worked with a bunch of men too, but I'll concentrate on the women here. Those were the women I was working with. And they were generally extremely attractive, extremely intelligent, very hardworking, and very focused on career development. And they'd done very well in junior high school and high school. Then they, aced college and their LSATs. And then when they were articling, the firms snapped them up quickly, and then they rocketed up towards partnership. And then they were 30, and they all thought, what the hell am I doing working 70 hours a week with a bunch of insanely competitive men? Right. And that is the question. It's like, what are you doing? Exactly. And then even if you're radically successful, let's say in your law school career, if you get run over by a bus on the way to work, the waters just close over you at the firm, and the firm continues on. It's not like anyone cares. Not really. So now I'm not saying that people shouldn't pursue a career. I'm not saying that. But I would say even in my case, and I'm male, so that makes a big difference, because men are also oriented towards status, competition, victory in a way that women just aren't, at least not in the career domain. And the reason for that is very straightforward. And the thing that makes men, by default, most attractive to women is their comparative success in the hierarchy of men. It's a walloping predictor. And it's irrelevant to men. Like, men don't care at all whether women are successful in their career. It's not a determinant of their attractiveness. In fact, it's often the contrary. Well, these women that I'm talking about, they were often alone. Why? Well, they're beautiful. So that intimidated 90% of men right there. They're smart. So that's another 90% of the remaining 10%. They're accomplished and wealthy. Well, first of all, who's going to approach them? And second, who are they going to accept? Because women are hypergamous, right?
Does that mean that men are insecure and sort of emasculated by a strong, successful woman?
Sure. Yeah, well, but there's reason for that. It's not weakness on the part of men. Exactly. It's the desire of the woman to find someone who brings a benefit to the relationship. And why? Well, because a woman will make herself vulnerable when she has a child. And so she's looking for a man who'll be helpful compared to her. Okay, so if the woman is full of ability, well, then her standards for a guy who's going to be helpful get very high. And that's hard on her because it decreases the pool of available candidates radically. So there's a negative relationship between IQ and women and the probability of being married. So it's harsh. Now, are men intimidated? Well, yes, obviously. Are men intimidated by beautiful women? Well, you can answer that, especially if you're young. Why? The probability that any given beautiful woman is going to reject you when you're a young man is it's basically 100%. Now, it's not exactly 100%, and there are exceptions, but the default response is rejection. And beautiful women get hit on, a fair bit.
It's interesting because there's a bunch of stats which I find quite interesting. One of them is that sexlessness is increasing.
Yeah.
People are having less and less sex.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Does it matter?
Oh, it's a catastrophe.
And why are we having less sex? What is the complex web of factors that have brought us to this place? And also,
well, one of them I would say is that in a free and easy mating environment, women don't trust men, and no wonder. Well, here's a terrible thing to know. So imagine that there are men who are oriented towards short-term relationships, and there are men who are oriented towards long-term relationships, committed relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that would be the men who want love along with sex, let's say, love and commitment. Then there's the party today because we're all dead tomorrow sort of guys. And there's some women like that too, although fewer women because they pay a much higher price for sexual impropriety.
Mhm.
So the pool of short-term maters has more men in it. Okay, what do they like? Well, the personality studies have already been done. They're Machiavellian, which means they use their language to manipulate. They're narcissistic, which means they want unearned social status. They're psychopathic, which makes them predatory parasites. And they're sadistic. Okay, so now you open up the mating market so that short-term dalliances are acceptable. You throw all the women into the hands of the psychopaths. Well, that's a bad strategy. And it's no wonder that it decimates the mating market because women are thinking, well, are those men trustworthy? And the answer is no. And sex is costly. Like, we have this immature delusion that we can free sex from like the grip of the oppressive patriarchy, let's say. It's like, no, you can't. Obviously, you can't. Emotional entanglements are an inevitable consequence of intimate physical relationships. There's that. Then there's the issue of abortion and pregnancy. That actually constitutes a problem. And then there's sexually transmitted disease. And that's just like the first of a very long list of potential problems with sex. So there's no simple sexual landscape. And there are deluded people who think there is a simple landscape and that there should be. But they tilt hard in the psychopathic direction because they're manipulative.
Do you believe in no sex before marriage as a concept?
As an ideal, yeah, that's right.
And why would that result in better relationships and a better society more broadly?
Well, here's one way of looking at it. So let's say you take the alternative approach, okay? You're going to try your partner on for size. So you live together. Well, first of all, we know that couples who live together are more likely to get divorced rather than less. We know that the probability of cheating is proportionate to the number of partners before the marriage or the committed relationship.
Really?
Well, partly that's just self-evidence. Like the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Right. So if you had a lot of partners, you're the sort of person who's likely to have a lot of partners. And then there's also a conceptual problem. It's like, are you shopping for a car? It's like you're going to take it out for a test drive and see how it goes. Okay, that's not the right metaphor. And then here's another problem. I'm going to see what it's like to be married by living with this person. It's like, no, you're not. Because you don't know what it's like to be married until you're married. Whatever you're doing when you live together, that's not a model for what you're going to do when you're married. Because being married is different. It's permanent.
So you're saying don't live together before you...
Well, I know the stats on living together. It's like you live with someone and then you marry them, you're more likely to get divorced.
So
it doesn't work. Like the theory was you try it out and if it works, you go ahead with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the theory